Hi again. This is part 2 to the chakra removal video I just recently did. I mentioned Kundalini energy in that one, so I just want to unpack it a little bit more for you. Because like the New Age and most of the practices in the New Age, the Kundalini awakening is actually quite dangerous. And there's something that a lot of practitioners aren't actually sharing or talking about. It's always sold as a spiritual epiphany, as an amazing experience to have. And you might have seen a lot of videos as well with people writhing and shouting and screaming and releasing on the floor when they're having these experiences in group settings as well. There's a lot of people that go around filming these situations, and also whether they've got consent or not, and posting those on social media, which to me has always been a violation of someone's privacy. Even if they have given permission for that, something should remain sacred. And when I personally see those types of videos, when everyone's having some sort of major catharsis and there's obviously a lot of trauma being released, and probably at the same time you could also argue being created, that it's very similar to the kind of demonic purification rites or a lot of the religious laying of hands things that you see. And while there is obviously people want to advertise what they do and the experiences, and people who have had these experiences want to share what's happened for them, there's no way of any viewer really knowing what went on. What was the energetic and the dynamic behind the practice? What are the qualifications of the person running the group gathering, whatever it is? What was actually going on with the individual? How much work they'd done on themselves before doing these practices, for example, what sort of trauma that they're carrying, because we're all carrying it in different ways. And a lot of Kundalini yoga teachers, like a lot of yoga teachers, are actually not fully trained or correctly trained in trauma management. So that's a big red flag to me immediately. But also just the sharing of that yourself in that vulnerable space. And there's nothing wrong with sharing your vulnerability, of course, don't get me wrong. But in that space when you're very energetically vulnerable, especially on using these black screen devices and these mirrored devices that we are with all of the ciphering that's going on, my feeling is that there's just a little bit of, a little bit of danger there. So you can make up your own mind about that, of course. And you might have had a Kundalini awakening experience, and I'd love to hear about it in the comments if you feel to share that. But what I'm talking to today here is how this practice can open you up, as I just mentioned, to psychic attack, to energetic infiltration. So I'll also mention here, just as a side note, and again, this is my own opinion and experience as well, that things like schizophrenia, for example, or personality disorders, labels that are assigned to people with all sorts of extreme experiences and presentations, through the shamanic lens and through the energetic lens, are quite often just either a really severe, extreme, and chronic, long-term, in other words, energetic imbalance. But there's also a lot of psychic interference going on. So if you imagine that you are somebody who's got a lot of stuff, a lot of trauma, they haven't really been taught how to address that, they haven't had the skills or the tools or the time to do that, or even the awareness that they do have stuff to heal. And then they're put in this situation where they are analysed, psychoanalyzed, and pigeonholed to a degree, and only treated through the allopathic model of, well, there's a reason for this, which there is too as well, chemical imbalances and the food that you eat and nutrition and those sorts of things, they must be taken into account. But as far as in regards to Kundalini awakening and people seeking out these extreme religious practices, funny I said that, extreme spiritual practices, when you are fragmented energetically, then you have less ability to obviously be contained, to maintain your usual field of protection, for example. And taking a lot of these things is definitely connected to this, as much as people may not want to hear that. And we are seeing a lot of damage, and there are plenty of scientific papers to prove this, that the neuroplasticity and the brain damage caused by chemicals in these things is very real and traceable and trackable and provable. So when somebody becomes more disconnected from themselves, from their sovereign self, from their light, whatever you want to call that, then they lose that ability, that peristalsis almost, that squeezing, containing, drawing in ability to make sure that they are contained and safe and protected in amongst all the stuff that's going on that we all have to walk around through every day. So when you have, and again, through the shamanic lens, you have things like power loss and soul loss. We've all made contracts in past lifetimes and this one as well, and also there's the element as well of being spat back into this plane without permission and just being assigned certain practices and experiences that we may not actually have chosen. There's an element of that. This is not an earth school for you to come and just learn all these lessons. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been mind wiped when you came back in, for example. So through that shamanic lens, if you have lost and fragmented or sold or bargained off or had stolen through all sorts of different imprints and implant situations in the past, aspects of yourself, then the work is to actually integrate and to call those pieces of yourself back. But if you are so scattered from within and psychologically disturbed as a result, and then of course physically disturbed as well, then something like a Kundalini activation, something that is designed to awaken apparently 2 snakes or an etheric egg implant, and I'll get to that in a minute, out of your base chakra to move through your body and your spine, crossing over at these chakra points, which I mentioned in that other video, quite possibly could be, again, a grid, a mesh imprint in itself. That's a lot of pressure that needs to go somewhere. It needs to have a release point. And that's why a lot of people have these psychoses experiences, because a lot of the stuff comes up, the energy comes up and it moves through, and they have these obviously physical responses where they're writhing and screaming and sometimes vomiting and defecating and those sorts of things as well. And then it comes to the heart space and things might settle or explode or just sort of like go neutral for a moment. And depending on what's going on with their sense of awareness, their inner dialogue, again, the level of trauma that they are holding in their tissues and in their mind, of course, as well. Then when that energy comes up and it reaches like a glass ceiling, it's got nowhere to go. So it's going to implode, literally energetically implode that person. And if their consciousness is not particularly elevated, again, because of these sorts of things and a lot of other reasons as well, but definitely because of those things, in the recent years, we've certainly seen that damage getting more and more prevalent. Then that person, unless they are guided by somebody who is skilled with mental health issues, for example, and who knows how to manage trauma, then that creates, as I said before, a very dangerous situation, a potentiality. And even a lot of the Indian gurus and the Indian teachers who have been obviously a lot more au fait with Kundalini energy than any of us in the West are, they also warn about the dangers of this practice. Because this is the thing that most people aren't talking about. They're focusing on this beautiful opening and awakening and epiphany energy. And the majority of people do have that experience. It's a small percentage of people that just get completely done over and have psychotic episodes. Some of them come back, some of them don't. I haven't heard of anybody dying, but I wouldn't be surprised. But this is the thing, when you are opening up, when you activate that channel and energy starts to move through those spinning wheels, whether they're imprints or not, what you're actually doing is increasing your exposure to the astral plane. And at the moment, that's not a place where you really want to be hanging out. There's all sorts of crazy stuff going on in there. And people that actually go to astral travel for leisure, for recreation, which a lot of people do naively, are putting themselves at a very high risk of spiritual possession, of entity attachment. So you can see that if that happens, then that's where the multiple personalities come from, because you've got lots of different entities, who knows how many, coming in and looshing off you and expressing themselves through you. So when the Kundalini moves up through what's called the Sushumna channel in yoga, you've got the 2 nadis, Ida and Pingala, and then the Sushumna channel. That's not an actual physical channel. Your spine is there as a physical marker. But Sushumna is actually what they call a subtle body or a subtle energy. So it's actually connected to the astral plane. So in basic terms, in layman's terms, what does that mean? It means that you're opening yourself up to an astral realm that is the home turf of a lot of dark entity creatures, beings, whatever you want to call them. So if you're ill-equipped or unfamiliar or completely unaware of this, and of that potentiality, and that there will be things on the other side where you're sort of peeling through the veil, then again, that puts you, as well as the person guiding you, in a very precarious situation, because you need to know how to navigate that. So as this energy moves up through those chakra gates, that opens up another portal, or it widens the portal. It increases your susceptibility to being seen in the unseen. And I can tell you from personal experience that just because you see the darkness doesn't mean that it doesn't see you. It most definitely does. So Kundalini energy moves at the speed of thought, apparently, which is faster than the speed of light. So as your energy is moving up through these chakra points, building momentum and getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and needing to have some sort of access point, which usually comes out through the crown, you need to know how to manage that, or be with someone who can guide you through that intensity. This is quite literally a mind field. So whether you choose to do Kundalini or not, whether you've already been doing it or not, my question always is, if you are there to merge with God, or gods, other deities, as the Hindu philosophy suggests, why? For what purpose? Who does that serve? And what happens to your energy, especially if you regard yourself as a sovereign being, when you submit to an external authority in this way? Now, I mentioned the two snakes at the base of the spine, which is the traditional explanation of what's happening with Kundalini, and then those two snakes weave up, crossing over at the chakra points to come up through the crown. But there are a lot of people that say that snakes have been bastardized through this practice, that it wasn't actually about snakes, it was more just an energetic, it was some sort of other container. So you can go and investigate that for yourself, but I will share with you that there's a lot of information around the galactic history and the Orion Wars, especially where women are concerned, where there was a lot of invasion energy on this planet and other realms, and where a lot of deities and gods, you could call them reptilians, you can call them Dracos, you can call them all sorts of different sort of galactic beings if you like, came down to invade, certainly here in this realm, this is all in the Bible as well, to take wives of human women's, essentially war and rape, which is why we have that culture ingrained in humanity's psyche and have for so long. And part of their experiments on women was to plant an etheric egg in the womb. And that sort of acts like it's not like a ticking time bomb, but it acts like a regulator or a controller that is distorting and has distorted our natural cycles for a very, very long time. And not just our cycles in regards to our menstrual cycle, but our eating cycles, our thinking, emotional cycles, our energetic cycles, our seasonal cycles, our relationship to the cycles of nature, because we are so powerful. So they've had to put something in. It's almost like a handicap sort of imprint that is meant to distort our natural energy. And whether or not you believe that, you may have heard of that before, you can go and research that again. But for me, I've seen that in my clients, and I've also felt that in the past in myself, having to remove that. So I would advise, as I do with everything, is that you are very careful about who you allow to work on you, for body work, for energy work. And that this is a reminder also that you know, nobody knows you and your energy field better than you do. So you are the best person to actually do this work for yourself, because there's always the risk of infiltration or some sort of cross-contamination. You just don't know. So the idea is to remove that snake vision and that snake entity coming up through the body that's been described as the Kundalini serpent. Yes, it is most definitely a serpent, and it is not your friend. So if you're having these experiences, I would highly recommend that you pull that nag out of your crown. You pull it out of the top of your head. It's really interesting because now this is the second time that I've had to stop this video to try and record it. Everything was silent this morning, and now suddenly I've got guys next door chopping down trees. So every time I go to do a video that is sharing stuff which is a little bit maybe controversial or is trying to educate people, all these sorts of distractions start to come in. So I'm going to keep talking through the noise, and hopefully it won't be too distracting for you. And of course, any sort of external noise like that is an opportunity for us to just employ more of our focus and concentrated powers. And eventually it'll go away. Or it won't bother us so much. So like any of these practices, including going to a yoga class, your state of being before you go into that space is key. So the same as if you are going to a yoga class and say you've just had a fight with your friend or your partner, or you've just lost your job, or you've had a bad day, or whatever it is, the kids are driving you nuts, you're driving yourself nuts, whatever it is, you take that onto the mat with you. And it's the same with the Kundalini energy. So we're always going to have, we don't want to bastardize or demonize the ego completely. There are good and negative aspects of the ego, of course. But whatever your relationship is with yourself and your ability to be humble and real with yourself as well, when you get in that really vulnerable, open, energetic space, which is the Kundalini rising, similar to birth space, everything comes up. So whatever you have been suppressing, whatever you've been holding back, whatever you might have been giving permission to feed through you, either consciously or unconsciously, is going to be exacerbated. And because most of us humans have ego issues, myself included, when we have these epiphanies, or what we think are epiphanies, and sometimes they can be, especially if we are connecting with God and then we're told that we are God and we have all these powers, and I'll get to those in a moment, then we can become quite egotistical, and then that sort of adds or just sort of keeps that vibration, that belief within the New Age movement, certainly, that there are only certain people among the collective that have the skills to do this, that there's a superiority, like I know how to do this, or I got this information and this is what I'm here to share. So it's a very fine line between, as I said before, what you take into those practices is important. So if you have the ability to discern and to pull yourself up as well and recognize that, okay, well, this may not be all about me, and that there's something here that I can learn and I can teach, but I'm not God, I'm not the creator, I'm in a creation, and I have that energetic potential for sure. But again, being mindful of whether we're making any contracts when we allow these entities supposed entities that are working on our favor and on our side, access our consciousness. And as always, I say, if we're already enlightened beings, if we're already invincible and immortal, and we can never die because we were never born, then why do we need to have these enlightening, ascending experiences anyway? Everything is within. So I just mentioned the cities, and the cities are like supernatural energetic powers that you can apparently achieve through Kundalini activation. Things like levitation, being able to be really, really super tiny small, to be really big, to be really heavy, to be very light, to be invisible. The ability to realize all of your wildest dreams. So a little bit of a God complex sort of energy going on there. So within this practice, as far as I'm aware, there aren't people talking about when you reach that God consciousness, when you have that epiphany, when you're suddenly able to connect with and draw down into the 3D, who knows, all of those amazing divine gifts. They're not talking about, well, saving humanity from slave consciousness or releasing the imprints and the implants and the binds around Mother Gaia. It's all very me, about now I've got this amazing power and I can do all these things, which in a way is good because we are here to realize the magnificent being that we are. But that's never really sort of sat well with me, because if you have that ability and then suddenly you're able to make a difference with your consciousness, with your practices, with your words, however that comes through for you, why wouldn't you want to use that to help free your brothers and sisters or to end world hunger, those sorts of things? So it does seem that it focuses on self-mastery, again, which is a good thing, but it's all about me rather than healing the trauma of the planet, for example, or ecosystems, all those deep wounds in the collective psyche, which can free all of us, all sentient beings, from the tyrannical and oppressive and dark energies that have restricted and controlled us for so many eons. That kind of makes more sense to me anyway. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. The last thing that I'll mention here as well, in regards to being in that really open, fragmented, energetic space and writhing and moving around and being filmed and then having that put on these platforms too, so it's exposed to other things, is that a lot of people who have had these things are already very fragmented. That's just the reality now. And I know a lot of you watching this will already understand this, that the disconnection of the human from their consciousness, from their soul self, was what part of those things were about, a big part of those things. So if you have had those or multiple ones of those, maybe you're probably not even going to be in the Kundalini or healing space anyway, because that kind of goes hand in hand. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that you have taken them and you're either aware that they're not good and you're trying to make it, to heal yourself, or you've taken them and you're not aware of that, and then you find yourself in this sort of practice. Who knows? Whatever the circumstances are, that if you're already fragmented from having that nanotech in your body, a Kundalini experience is going to fragment you even further. And as I mentioned before, you want to pull that snake out of the crown. You want to actually move it viscerally and energetically out of your energy field. So then your natural Kundalini energy can still move. Because it's like in the chakra video that I said, like you can make up your own minds. We might still have these chakras. I believe the heart is the main big one. So there are these energy wheels or vortexes in our bodies. And other people say that we're not meant to have chakras at all. Other people say that you're meant to remove them, that whatever works for you, whatever feels right for you. The same with Kundalini. We do have a natural organic energy pathway. That's evidenced by acupuncture and qi and Chinese medicine and meridians and nadi points. And that's really all that a chakra is. It's like a little cluster of nadi points that spin and create energy. But they can also be portals. So in the not so great circumstance, especially in a space that's perhaps not as psychically clean as it could be, and you've got people shedding and fragmenting, and when I say shedding, I don't mean you can catch things from that, it's just the transmission of energy through frequency, then again, it's another layer of vulnerability, another layer upon another layer of vulnerability. So being really mindful if that is you, who you choose to do this work with, and I would even caution that you do this work at all. It's also worth noting that at some point, inevitably, most of the yoga gurus get caught out. So Yogi Bhajan was the one that brought Kundalini yoga to the Western world. And quite a few of his students in the last couple of decades, he's passed away now, have exposed him for sexual harassment, for sexual abuse, for systemic harassment, for dubious financial practices, let's just say that, and also for psychological manipulation. Now, one of his main teachers, Katie Griggs, who was also called Guru Jagat, she was exposed in 2021 for very similar practices. Now, she was in her defense, and she's now passed away as well, in 2021, I think it was. She was very against these things and very outspoken. So I've got to give credit where it's due, because she was aware and awake enough to see through that psyop. But allegedly, she was also following the same footsteps as Yogi Bhajan. So there's been a lot of yoga and a lot of New Age and a lot of even astrology and certainly breathwork practitioners, the people who have started these sorts of modalities that have been exposed for very similar things in recent years, which I find really interesting as well. So I want to end this video with a little story because essentially, really, what we're trying to do with the Kundalini, or we're trying to, an awakening, is we're, even in the back of our mind, we're looking for a deliverance of sorts. We're looking for a savior in some way, a deeper connection. And with sovereignty, it's always about going within to find that connection or reawaken that connection. So again, you do you, and you choose whatever practices you want to do, but just being aware of anything that you do, ask yourself that question. Is this helping to fortify and strengthen and advance or elevate my inner knowing and my innate power? Or am I fracturing or weakening myself in some way? Am I making a contract here with something that I really don't fully understand in the moment? So a couple of years ago when I read the Bible, and I've shared this story before, but not this one in particular, I went on a big journey with that, and it's a big part of this is why I removed myself from a lot of the New Age stuff that I was doing. And so I decided to go out to a deliverance, and I drove from the northern beaches all the way out into the west. And it took me about 2 hours to get to this church that did deliverances. I think it was once every month or something. And I didn't know what to expect. And I'd watched some of their videos and I'd researched this place in particular. It was one of the closest ones and the one that sort of felt like it might be, you know, the most aligned with me. And so I got there and the room was full. There's like hundreds of people there. And in a nutshell, the experience was just like really bizarre. It was very cult-like. And it was a husband and wife team. I can't remember their names. And I can't remember the name of the church either, but I've written about it in my book, Spirit Your Reality. So you can buy that on Amazon if you wish to, and you can read about that, my expose of all the last couple of years, all the crazy stuff that's been going on. And I share this story there. So I get there and I just was like, okay, I'm here. I'm going to just go whole hog. I'm just going to go right into it now. I'm here. I may as well. So he's up on the stage and he's pontificating and there's music and people are chanting. They've got their arms in the air and they're all sort of in this trance. It all happened really quickly. And I was standing up with people. I wasn't doing all that stuff. I was kind of just, I was allowing myself to be in the moment, but I didn't know what they were doing. So I just was kind of like following along. So he would come around the group with 3 or 4 helpers, and they would catch you. He would literally smack his palm over your forehead, and people would either make noise or not, and they just basically drop to the ground. So I was watching this happen around me, and I was just standing there, and I could feel something going on. And I had one of the helpers just randomly come up and hold my hand, which was really lovely. And he was a big, strong, like I think South African dude. And that was really useful for me. And then literally after he did that, then I was the next one that was like forehead slapped and dropped to the ground. And I didn't feel anything as far as like an epiphany or a connection to God or a rebirthing. I just lay on the ground and I was very peaceful and I was aware of my breath. But people around me were going off. They were literally just like doing the full writhing and screaming and crying, etc. And there are other helpers there holding them and sometimes moving them out of the room into somewhere else because they were probably too noisy and it was a little bit too much. So after about 15, 20 minutes of that, I was just lying there and I just thought, I'm just going to lie here and just pretend not to be here and close my eyes. And he's like, well, that's not happening to me. And I didn't have that, moment of like Jesus spoke to me. And that was fine. And I came out of that experience and I drove home for like, an hour and a half, 2 hours, just in this zone of thinking, I wonder how much of that is actually real, how much of that is really happening. When you take away all the marketing and the showmanship and that hype that builds when you're in a crowd of devotees of any kind, when you just get that, you get swept up in the moment. I wonder how much of that is actually authentic energy or how much of that is actually ego. And as I said, I didn't have any major epiphany after that, and my life didn't change and get better or worse. It was just pretty much the same. I didn't have anything shift with my body. I didn't have more awareness, and that was quite a few years ago now. One thing I will mention, that when I was lying on the floor with my eyes closed and just perceiving and just allowing things to unfold, is that I felt that things were moving from people. Like I could feel things moving out of them around me, and I could also feel things trying to get in. And I could certainly feel something trying to get into me. So I instantly shielded up. And that's when I sort of went, oh, that's really disappointing, because there was part of me that was kind of like really looking forward to some amazing Jesus moment. And where I was in my spiritual journey as well, reading the Bible and just being open to all that stuff, I was like, yeah, this sounds really great. I really hope it does happen. But it didn't. And when I was lying on the floor feeling stuff coming out of people, which could have been demonic entities, attachments, it could have been Wi-Fi stuff, implants, who knows. There was a mix of that in the field, but then also the opportunity being created simultaneously for things to come in. So I could feel things hovering around, certainly around me. So I must assume that they were hovering around other people, looking for an opportunity to get in when people were so exposed and open. So ultimately, I think with this video, I just want to remind you to be aware all the time, to remember that you are a sovereign being, that you have these innate gifts, that you don't need an intermediary or an external source of any kind to help you get to where you need to go. All you need is the intention and the time and the discipline to start to awaken these things which are already inside you. And from that space of inner knowing, then you can determine and discern what's actually right for you, what practices are safe for you, and what are necessary as you keep growing on your spiritual path. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.